Hello, I'm Antonio Mora. This is the News and News.com Day in Brief. Today's top stories in 4 minutes. It's Friday, October 12th at about 7 p.m. For once, let's start with good news. U.S. equity markets bounced back today. The Dow by 1.15%, the S&P 500 by 1.42%, and the hard-hit NASDAQ by 2.29%. That cut losses to about 4% for the week. Turkey freed an American pastor today after holding him in jail or house arrest for 2 years. Andrew Brunson had been sentenced to 3 years in prison for supposedly aiding opponents of President Erdogan. He faced decades behind bars on spying charges. Brunson always proclaimed his innocence, as did the U.S. government. The Trump administration, in reaction, imposed sanctions on Turkey earlier this year, and the threat of more sanctions and trade tariffs helped trigger an economic crisis there. So Erdogan finally cried uncle, and the Brunson family is heading back to the U.S. Also, South Korean President Moon Jae-in says it's just a matter of time before the U.S. and North Korea declare an end to the Korean War, and that he's optimistic the Kim regime will agree to fully denuclearize. On the bad news front, it's difficult to describe the nightmare that Hurricane Michael has unleashed on the southeastern United States. The death toll keeps rising, including 5 people in Virginia, more than 800 miles away from where Michael made landfall in Florida. 500,000 Virginians were without power today, even though Michael was only a tropical storm by the time it hit the Old Dominion state. Of course, nothing compares to what's happened in the Florida Panhandle. Words just can't possibly describe the extent of the devastation the storm caused in coastal towns. Turkey reportedly has audio and visual evidence that Washington Post contributor Jamal Khashoggi was killed inside the Saudi consulate in Istanbul. The U.S. is reportedly operating under the working assumption that the journalist was murdered there. On that assumption, the big question is the extent of the involvement of Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, a frequent target of that journalist. Bin Salman has proved ruthless in the past, even jailing some of the kingdom's most powerful people in the Riyadh Ritz-Carlton until he was able to extort them for billions. And the Saudi justice system borders on the medieval. The Trump administration has been reluctant to take action against the Saudis for a long list of reasons, including oil and the importance of the almighty dollar, not just for the U.S., with more than $100 billion in arms deals, but also for Trump family interests. Trump said he is going to call the Crown Prince's father the king. Outside the White House, many leaders, including Republican Senator Bob Corker, the chair of the Foreign Relations Committee, argue that the Saudis must pay a very large price. The U.S., like it or not, is between a rock and a hard place. If the Saudis did this, Senator Corker is right. The U.S. can't demand respect for human rights if it's unwilling to hold its allies to account. But strategic considerations are huge. Beyond the Saudi investments in the U.S. and American businesses, they often work as a stabilizing force for oil prices within OPEC. Saudi interests in the Middle East are increasingly aligned with American interests as a buffer against Iran and extremist elements. While the Saudis and Israelis don't have formal relations, an informal, constructive relationship is emerging. And despite his ruthless streak, bin Salman has allowed greater openness in Saudi society. I'm glad I'm not a diplomat. In our alternate universes segment, The Great Divide Between Conservative and Liberal Media, I have frequently said we ignore the world at our own peril. The cable news networks, in their ratings-driven Trump obsession, have become, to a great extent, political talk television that delivers minimal coverage of what is happening elsewhere in the world. How much time have they dedicated this year to covering the Middle East? How much time do you think they gave to the horrible bombing in Yemen by the Saudis that killed dozens of school children on a bus? How many Americans even know there's a war in Yemen, much less the geopolitical issues involved? So today there was phenomenal hypocrisy as the talking heads self-righteously condemned the Saudis and the U.S. for providing weapons to the Saudis that are used in the war in Yemen. The cable networks didn't pay much attention to the school bus story when it happened, as they have generally ignored the civil war and the tremendous suffering and hunger in Yemen. But now they superficially pontificate, and even now don't bother to explain why the U.S. supports the Saudis. There was no mention of the fact that the war in Yemen was started by rebels, supported by Iran, and allied with the longtime corrupt dictator of the country, who was forced to resign by a pro-democracy movement during the Arab Spring. That anti-American alliance overthrew the legitimate Yemeni government, supported by the U.S. and the Saudis. Changes the picture a bit, doesn't it? Finally, we started with good news and we'll end with two other positive stories. Usain Bolt, not happy enough to be the fastest man who ever lived, wants to be a soccer star. He played his first professional game as a starter in Australia and he scored twice. Go Usain. I'll spare you my imitation Bolt pose. And Michelle Obama revealed that George W. Bush was handing her an old cough drop in a moment that was caught on camera during John McCain's funeral and that went viral. She said the former president is her partner in crime and that she loves him to death. Maybe bipartisanship isn't dead after all. We have all those stories and much more updated around the clock 7 days a week on newsandnews.com, where you will find all you need to know in one place. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel by clicking on the right of your screen just below this video, and please follow us on Facebook at Real News and News. Follow me on Twitter at AmoraTV. Have a great weekend. I will see you again on Monday.